everybody, this is the Marine with Backpacking with a Hammock. Now that you have a hammock, you have a suspension, you know how to set it up, you know how to stay warm throughout the night with the different types of insulation. Now we're going to look at ways to be protected from the weather, the rain, the sun, and the wind. In this 5th episode of Beginner's Guide to Hammock and Hammock Camping, we are going to look at tarps, the different styles, the different materials they use to make them, and size, different length and width that works best for you. Now the first thing we're going to do before we dig in, we're going to look at some of the tarp terminology, and this will help us understand the tarp. Now the components of the tarp, first is a side panel. There's 2 side panels, one on this side and the other side. Now the 2 side panels are sewn together up on top on the ridge here. And then some of the side panels will have these pull-outs. Now this tarp has just a 1 panel pull-out. And the purpose of the pull-outs is to pull the tarp out away from you so you have more room inside. On this side you have a lot more room, and this side is closer to the hammock. All around the tarp there's a sewn hem to reinforce the tarp. The end of the tarp is called the beak, and at the tip of the beak is called the ridge point. And what holds the tarp up is called the ridge line. You can have a continuous ridge line, 1 piece or 2, and they connect to the anchor points on each end, in this case a tree. And this will hold the tarp up off the ground and off the hammock. The connection points for the tarp, you'll have 2 on each side and on the back side, and some will have it in the middle. I like to have it in the middle, more secure during the wind. And then of course on top where the ridge lines are, and you'll have grommets, D-rings, or you'll have steel split rings. Now in each corner on the bottom here, I have a piece of shot cord about 6 to 12 inches connected to the D-ring. And the reason why I have this is with a nylon tarp or sil nylon or sil poly, it will stretch, and this way it'll help protect the tarp. And then what's connected to the shot cord is guide lines. And the guide lines will go down to a stake. If you have a Cuban or Dyneema tarp, you don't need to have shot cord. And some tarps, like winter tarps, 4-season tarps, will have doors on each end or one end. And another thing that's really becoming popular to hold the tarp into is called a snakeskin. And the snakeskin just holds the tarp in. They can be either mesh or Cuban fiber, or any other material like nylon. Now there's 2 types of sacks that will hold your tarp. One is just a regular stuff sack, and the other one is a double-end stuff sack. A double-end stuff sack has opening on each end with a toggle to secure it, and this way you can easily hook up your ridge line and pull it out and hook it up on this side without taking the sack off. Now that you know some of the tarp terminology, we're going to look at the 5 basic styles of tarp. The first one is an asymmetrical or asym tarp. The second one is going to be a diamond or square shape. The third one's going to be just a rectangular. The fourth one's going to be a hexagon hex tarp. And the fourth one is going to be a 4-season style or winter tarp. Now the first style we're going to look at is asymmetric or asym. It's just basically a tarp that's cut and sewn in a parallelogram shape to mirror a diagonal lay in a hammock. Now the asymmetrical, the pros on this is it's very easy to set up. You have 2 tie down points, it's lightweight, but the con is it doesn't provide great weather protection. So if there was blowing wind with rain, you kind of expose a little bit there. So another con is you have to set this tarp up to fit you. So this is the head end, but if you set up where your head's over here, you have to switch the tarp around. Now the next style is a diamond or square. It's a square tarp, 9 by 9 feet, 2.7 by 2.7 meters, pitched from corner to corner to make a diamond shape. Then the length would be 12.5 feet or 3.8 meters. Now this is just a poly lawn tarp that I'm using for this example. I don't have a nylon, so this is a little sloppy. It should be a little tighter, but this is the best I can do. Now the pros with the diamond shaped tarp is you have 2 connection points to tie down with the guidelines, 1 on each end. And so you have many options with it. You can keep it square, you can use it in different angles. And another pro is they're really easy to get in. You can go on this end and out on that end, so you got a nice opening to go in and out of. Now the cons with the diamond shaped tarp is the ends can be too long. So if you have a square tarp that's over 9 feet, it can be just too long and then hang down. You have to pitch it high. And also it's hard to keep the edges taut because of the shape of it. And the biggest con of this is the weather. So when it's really windy like right now, or if it's snowing or raining, it doesn't give you the best protection. This is probably the least protection you'll have of all tarps. Now the next style is rectangular. The rectangular really gets a bad rap, and I really like them. They give you a lot of protection from the elements. And they're really popular and they work well with the bridge hammock. The pros with the rectangle tarp is you have more material, which is square, that gives you more protection from the wind and the weather like rain. And also it gives you a little more privacy. And another pro is that they're really popular if you buy a poly tarp. You can see with this wind blowing, the extra material is flopping in the wind. And with that extra material, it makes it heavier. And also you have to have more tie-out points. You don't have to, but I suggest having one in the middle to hold that extra material down. It really helps. Now this tarp here is a war bonnet cloudburst. Now the next style is a hexagon or hex. These are the more common or popular options for hammock camping. They basically have a catenary cut edge, cat cut for short, that create a taut pitch which eliminates the material flapping in the wind. The pros with the hex tarp is you can see the catenary cut, the cat cuts coming up in here. So you can see with the wind blowing, it keeps the edges taut so the material is not flopping in the wind. They're fairly easy to set up, and again, they're probably the most popular tarps for hammock camping. Now the cons with the hex tarp, with the beak there, with the cat cut coming across, it exposes you more to the weather conditions. And these can be a little bit more expensive because of the cuts on here. Now this tarp is a Clark's Vertex. Now the next style we're going to look at is a 4-season or the winter tarp. These work great year-round and they give you the maximum protection from the elements. They're basically off the style of a hex tarp with wider panels, and they will have doors on one side or on both sides to give you the maximum protection. Now this tarp is from Superior Hammock. This is a prototype that he's working on. This has one big door instead of 2 doors. And he's also will have 2 doors also, but it's not going to be out for a couple months. He wanted me to tell you. And it has Velcro, so it's really nice. It automatically comes with Velcro to open and close. Now the pros on the 4-season winter tarp is that it has doors on the end so you can close it up and you get the maximum protection against the weather. The panels are a little bit longer, it gives you more protection. And also you give more privacy. Now the cons on the 4-season winter is that it could be expensive and there's a lot more material, so it makes it a little bit more bulky and heavier. Now that you have decided on the style, the next thing we have to look at is the material, what the tarp is made out of. We're going to look at 5 basic materials. The first one is polyurethane, which is called poly. The second one is nylon, a ripstop. The third one is sil nylon. The fourth one is sil poly. And the fourth one is Cuban fiber, which is also known now as Dyneema. Now the first material we're going to look at is a polyurethane or poly tarp. These are available in any department stores. They're very cheap. And this is really a good tarp to start off with. But let's look at some of the pros and cons. Now the pros on the poly or polyurethane is that you can find them in any department store. They're really cheap. This tarp was just over $5, so they're really inexpensive. They're very waterproof, they're very strong. The cons are they're very heavy and very bulky, and they're hard to set up because with a diagonal lay, with an asymmetrical or asym, this would work fine, but a lot of tarps don't have a center grommet if you want to set it up in a rectangular shape. So these can be very difficult to set up, and there's a way of doing it, and I'll show you that in the next video. But if you want to use a poly tarp, and it's a great tarp to start off with, look for a tarp that has a center grommet in it. So you can use a rectangular, or in this case, you can use it asymmetrical. The next material we're going to look at is nylon. Nylon is your more popular, common material that's used for tarps for hammock camping. But let's look at the pros and cons. So the pros on the nylon tarp, it's very supple, it flexes really well, so it's very packable. You can really squish it down. They're very durable, and they're also very lightweight. Now the cons on this tarp, it absorbs water. So if you're on a week trip and it rains the whole week, it'll absorb water and it'll get heavier and heavier throughout the week. And they tend to be a little more expensive compared to a poly tarp. Now the next type of material we're going to look at is sil nylon and sil poly. Sil nylon is just silicone that is coated on nylon, and sil poly is polyurethane just coated on nylon, and it just makes it a lot more waterproof. Not as waterproof as Cuban Fiber or Dyneema, but it really enhances it. Now the pros with the sil nylon and sil poly, it's a lot more waterproof. It doesn't absorb the water will run off, and it makes the tarp a little bit stronger. But the cons are, with that coating on there, it makes it a little more bulkier, heavier, and a little more expensive. Now the next material we're going to look at is Cuban Fiber or Dyneema. A lot of people say, is it Dyneema or is it Cuban Fiber? Well, a year ago, Dyneema acquired the Cuban Corporation, which primarily made Cuban Fiber, and rebranded the name to Dyneema. And that's why it's called Dyneema now. I'm old school, I call it Cuban Fiber. But Cuban Fiber or Dyneema is very strong, very waterproof. It's tear resistant, but not puncture resistant. And although the name has been changed, but the price hasn't changed, and it's still expensive. I thought they'd be coming down now, but they could be 2 to 3 times more than a nylon tarp. Now this is Cuban or Dyneema tarp from Hammock gear. It's called the Winter Palace. What's great about this tarp is it's very waterproof. When the rain lands on it, it just runs right off. And if it does get wet, you can shake it and it dries off super quick. It's also very lightweight material. So that's why a lot of people are going to it, because it cuts the weight in half, especially compared to a nylon tarp. It's very strong, so you don't have to have shock cord on there. So you can just tie it right there and crank it right down, and it stays nice and taut in the wind. So Cuban Fiber Dyneema is made out of this translucent material, so a lot of sun will come in there. Some will put a pattern on there to block the sunlight coming in there. I like this because if it's raining in the middle of the day and it's still light out, I can play cards underneath there, I can sit and read, because a lot of light is transmitted in there. But one thing with Cuban Fiber, is very bulky. It doesn't pack down like nylon. Now, like I said earlier, this tarp is very expensive. Now that you decided on the style and the material, now we have to look at the size of the tarp, the length and the width, to give you the maximum protection against the weather. So when you purchase a tarp, you got to make sure that it's long enough. This one you can see is too short. The ends of the hammock is hanging out, and you can see that the water break is right here, the connection to the continuous loop in the hammock. So we want to make sure that the tarp goes a few inches past those 2 water breaks. Now you can see with this 11-foot hammock and this 11-foot tarp, the water break is just right at the edge. If I would have had a shorter tarp, like a 10-foot tarp, water would have came right down the hammock. So you really want to get a tarp that fits you. So this is 11-foot tarp and 11-foot hammock. Now this is a 12-foot tarp. This offers a maximum protection. These are really great in adverse conditions. But the drawback is this is an 11-foot hammock, and even if I had a 10-foot hammock, it'd even be worse. You can't hunker down on it because the ridgeline will interfere with the suspension. Now you can see the suspension is on the ridge line. So this tarp has to be lifted up. You can see I raised the tarp higher. Now this is a little over 6 feet. It's easy to get in and out of. So you can see in here I can stand right up, and my head is probably about 1 inch below it. So this is kind of nice, so I can move around and stand up instead of being hunched over. and I still have maximum protection. My water breaks from my hammocks are still underneath the tarp, so I don't have to worry about rain dripping in. You can see that this water break, it's anything that stops the rain from coming down. In this case, it's a whoopee hook, is underneath the tarp. So the tarp comes down here, so if it rains, it's well protected under the tarp. So the ideal, if you have a 10-foot hammock, you can have a 10-foot or 11-foot tarp. If you have an 11-foot hammock, you want an 11-foot or 12-foot tarp. Now the width on this tarp is 6 feet, 3 feet from the ridge line, and I wouldn't go any shorter than this because it leaves you exposed to the wind or the rain. So the width for tarps for hammocks would be from 6 feet to 10 feet, a little over 10 feet. Now this is an 11-foot tarp with the width of it is 10 feet. You can see with the edge here coming down is 5 feet, and it offers a lot of protection. I personally like the bigger tarps because I'm always in adverse weather conditions. Now this concludes this 5th episode of the Beginner's Guide to Hammock and Hammock Camping. The next episode we'll be looking at how to pitch and set up that tarp. If you like this video, please hit that like button down below. If you found this video to be helpful and insightful, please hit that subscribe button. That just notifies when the next video is coming out. But more important, if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to hear from you. Please write them down below. This is the Marine with Backpacking with a Hammock. Thank you for watching, and God bless.